Hello, everyone. As you're just joining us, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are so excited to have you with us today, and we are absolutely so excited to have Dr. Chris Graves from Jordan Elementary with us. Chris is, anytime I have a question about budget and numbers and lines and transfers, I text Chris and say, all right, my head is swimming. How do I do this? What's going on? And he's become just I think the unofficial Jedi of all of this for the district. And so thank you, Chris, for making time to hop on a webinar with all of us and kind of explain SDIG. It's quirky, there's weird stuff about it. And we are recording this, friends. And so if you have questions, odds are good that that's someone else's question as well. So what we're going to do is Chris is going to go through some quick high level do's and don'ts, and then we'll open it up to your questions. We also have some info that DeAndre, Vienna, and I and the team have collected from that's been useful from other principals, and we'll be sharing that as well. And so, Chris, I will advance your slides, friend. You just tell me next slide, and welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. And I will try to answer any questions anyone has. And it's going to be stressful from now until May 9th to get through this. But if anyone has a follow-up question, I'm happy to help. I'm in this like you are, right? We're trying to spend all this money we got, spend it on good things for our kids. If anyone reaches out, I may not be available at the moment, but I can always schedule in a phone call or a quick Google Meet to talk through some of these issues we're dealing with. So, the main thing I'm going to get at today, and Carla, I can jump right in on it now, or if you want to roll out a couple other things first, I have a document I created that's based on some of the guidance I got from Kwame recently. So, do you want me to share my screen and show that, or what are your
Oh,
thoughts?
why don't you put it in the chat, Chris? And then at the end, we'll give you we'll screen share and you can have it up as well. And friends, please put your questions in the chat. We know that we've gotten questions via email. We've tried to include them here in the deck. And to Chris's point, go ahead and throw those questions in the chat. And so, Chris, where should we start with some things?
I think that let's just start with the high level overview of like what we're trying to accomplish by May 9th, just to make sure we're all on the same page, right? So May 9th, we know it's the CPS self-imposed spending deadline for the fiscal year. There's, of course, always rumors they might extend the deadline. Well, we should never count on that, right? So that's like the big umbrella is the fiscal year and human resources hiring deadline for the year. But it's also in some ways, not in all ways, and we'll unpack this in a moment, the SDI deadline for the SDI grant, formerly Illinois Empower, right? The school improvement grant. Um, and that's for a couple reasons, right? I'm one of those principals, admittedly, that learned my lesson the hard way last year. I put that on myself and some of the confusion in the guidance that I really think Kwame and his team have really tried to clarify and make sure that they're being as clear as possible. And if we're not hearing it, we got to own our part of it to try to spend as much of that money as possible by May 9th. One big lesson I learned last year is, that you see it sometimes in the guidance that August 31st is a deadline. Well, it's a deadline, but it's not a deadline I'm really thinking of in any way, because if you're waiting till August 31st for really much of anything, that money could get burnt. So um, the encouragement that that office keeps giving is spend that money as much as possible now. For example, and we'll go a little more detail, but for example, hiring a professional development provider now. They can implement services before August 31st, but the thing that has to happen by before August 31st is receipting, not just receiving with the letter V, but receipting with RECEIPT, receipting all purchases. Because if I learned, like I said, I learned this the hard way, that if you don't, then those payments are still being honored, but it will come out of your internal, your actual school budget. So I'm trying my hardest to make sure that all purchase orders for software licenses, for professional services, for conference and fees, for instructional materials, non-digital, all of that is happening well before August 31st. In fact, I'm trying to get 100% of that spent by May 9th. And let's be honest, it's stressful to spend money. It's exciting, feels like Christmas morning, but it's also stressful. I know my clerk, Catalina Gonzalez, is amazing. She's stressing out. And in years prior, I had Teresa Soria was my clerk, amazing as well. And she would always stress out. We'd try to get it down to, maybe $15 across all budget lines, everything spent. I don't want the board taking that money back. But just figuring out, especially with this grant, it's so restricted, right? And so in the document that I put in the chat, I tried to give the examples that Kwame's given. Since they send out so much stuff, I tried to cull it down to one document that's just really relevant for the next 9 days. What's allowable, what we're trying to get done, a few strategies, and we'll unpack that a little bit more in a moment of some specific actionable flow of work before May 9th that I'll touch on. So let me pause right there for a moment, since I know this can be also a conversation. There are a few others on the call, and Carla, you've been in some conversations as well. So I'll pause there in case you or anyone else had any questions or any clarifiers, because I definitely want to make sure we're being mindful of how to get as much of this done for our students by May 9th.
So Chris, what's allowable and what's not allowable?
I'm not 100% sure in terms of what everyone else's budget looks like, but I'm kind of walking us through how to see things, and I'll show you actually like the way I look at my own budget here in a few minutes too. But look, if you see this up at the top, I'll even zoom in some in case your screen's a little hard to see, and then I can expand this here. This wording at the top is cut and pasted and just tweaked so it sounds third person instead of first person from Kwame, exactly what he told me recently. May 9th is the deadline that applies to all funding streams, but I'm still trying to push myself to think about May 9th, May 9th, May 9th, 100% of the money out the door. That's for everything, including this grant, right? Um, so even if you're planning on not receiving, receiving and receipting professional development in week 0, put it through now, right? Secure that vendor of Fulcrum Solutions or whoever. If you're working with mindful practices, now's the opportunity to book them. And they have an awesome calculator. I know Carla will talk about that in a few minutes. Um, Kwame also mentioned to me recently about how, we're not going to have access to Oracle after May 9th until into July. So try to think of how difficult that's going to be. When it does open up, are you really going to be able to get quotes and purchase things, have them delivered, i.e., received in Oracle and receipted by August 31st? I cut it too close last summer and I had to pay the price for that. So that's why I'm trying to get all this done now. So you can spend everything now. And the only exception of what goes past May 9th is buckets. And I put a little bit of that guidance in here of how if there are courtesy buckets, buckets that are scheduled to close on June 30th, if they still have money in them, Kwame tells me that how did he word it here? Unused buckets. And he's referring for us at least on a bucket that's being used but not exhausted. There's still going to be money on it as of June 30th. It says those buckets will be available for use in mid to late July through August 31st. And eventually when they open in mid-July, they will be backdated to July 1st. So that's the only magical money that I'm leaving there that will be spent. But here's the big scary part that I am so glad I asked him the question on. I remember when I was in office hours with him in March, and he and Crystal and others told us, understandably, they're doing the best they can with this, I think, that there would be another grant modification window in June or July. That's what I remember him telling me. And now, with all of the funding constraints in the district, he said, don't count on it. There may be, they're pushing for it, but they're not in control of that. If the district says we can't make it work with all of these different levers of approval and whatnot, we may not be able to move that money. So I'm just telling myself, you know what? If I needed something off of a budget line that I don't have it on right now, I got to find it in my own budget in the new fiscal year. So when budgets come out in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to just have to say, you know what? I got to pay for it in the SY26 budget, FY26, whatever. I'm trying to look at the money I have on my budget lines right now and just spend it as is and not give any of that money back to the board. So in the document here, you can see, we know there's that short list of approved vendors for professional administrative services. And sadly, as much as I would love for mindful practices beyond there, Carla can correct me if I'm wrong in saying this, but they're not on that list. But there are still ways to pay them, of course. And that's what I know Carla and her team are going to probably unpack today. But they're not on there. So yeah, if you have money on that line, we don't know if we're going to have a grant modification form. So I would recommend do spend that money. Say, well, let me pay for this with that line so I can reserve money to pay for a vendor I want to, such as mindful practices. So that's the 2 points right here. And then Carla, I'd love for you to take it and run with it from here. The approved vendors, you can see that in the link I put in the chat. And then for seminars, fees, subscriptions, professional memberships, you can attend any conference provided by a CPS vendor as long as the focus is academic and well aligned, et cetera, et cetera. So I found, for example, a Kagan cooperative learning workshop in Florida where I can pay for the members, based on a budget line I have, I can pay for the registration, but I'd still have to use my budget to pay for other aspects if I want to pay for like travel. But still, I have money that's on that line that I can't do anything else with. So, boom, some of it for administrative services, some of it for subscription fees, and then for software licenses is where I'm considering paying mindful practices. And with that, I can probably pass it off to Carla for a couple minutes. And at some point, Carla, I will show what we have in our how I manipulate my own budget on a spreadsheet. But I'll stop sharing my screen for now.
We have a couple folks, Chris, that are just re-entering, that are just entering now. So if you want to repost your guidelines document in the
Sure,
chat.
sure.
So something, friends, to think about is that that list of vendors, as Chris mentioned, is short. However, because mindful practices works in the realm of psychological services. So psychological services is anything around anxiety, coping skills. And so, as you all know, because that is our wheelhouse, then we don't actually have to be on that list. And so what Chris and I are going to share is the wording that you put into Oracle that just simply says, these are psychological services. And so these are our psychological services, as you know, apply to adult learners and adults in your buildings, as well as students. And so you might say like, oh, we didn't see you on that list. Never fear, friends, because we're psychological services, we don't have to be on that list. Psychological services are actually exempt. And so that's a good phew sigh of relief when it comes to planning. And so, Chris, talk to us about when you're talking to your colleagues and they're bumping up into the stress of SDIG, because it is stressful. You'd think having money to spend is like, oh, great, but it's there's stress, there's paralysis. Chris, how do we solve for some of that? I know you have more docs to share, but how do we solve for some of that spending paralysis?
Yeah, I have a process in place where, I mean, there's that philosophy in a lot of financial spaces that money is fungible. Money is fungible, right? It is. Um, if I know, I start with just working internally with my staff, even before looking at the budget. What are our needs? What are our needs, our wants, and our wishes, right? And that's kind of a priority list. I just start organically. I just ask around and I try not to think of it like the grocery store because the grocery store can be overwhelming. I try and think, okay, in the cereal aisle, what do we need? In the meat section, in the produce section, what do we need? So I ask staff and I try to give them a targeted question for instruction, for curriculum. What do we need for next year? And this isn't stuff I'm doing now. I try to do this weeks ago, but even if you have to do it now, convene a team with your staff, ask them those questions to make sure. Have your clerk run a purchase order inquiry from April through August of last year and see what the big ticket items are that you're not thinking. And of course, we know that a couple of big ticket items are software licenses. I've got probably $40,000 to $50,000 worth of those. And curriculum. I know that I've got about the same amount for that. And so we keep a spreadsheet now, just basically a list, but we put it on a spreadsheet of big purchases we need to make. And I've been chipping away at that for the past month. But it's hard because things seem to always like spiral out of control where we're going back and forth with a vendor over Amplify Science materials replenishment and things like that. But either way, I line up every year more than enough quotes than I have money for. If I've got $50,000 left that I have to spend by May 9th, I'm trying to stack up $60,000, $70,000 worth of quotes, knowing that I may not be able to push all of them through, but at the very least, I'm not going to leave money on the table. And then I set internal deadlines like my clerk is actually upset because our internal deadline was last Friday, and now we're going past this Friday with a payroll deadline next week on Wednesday, and then the spending deadline next Friday. Either way, I always recommend try to set your own internal deadline so that people, even if you get stressed out trying to meet it, at least if you extend it, it can release that pressure a little bit. Get those quotes lined up, go back and forth on vendors if they need to adjust it. And then when I say, coming full circle, when I say money is fungible, what I'm referring to is if I know that I need to purchase something, but I can't get it right now, well, what would I need to buy in next year's budget that I might be able to buy now? My new copier contract, That's one. So if I spend that now, that's $18,000 I'm not going to have to spend in next year's budget that I could set aside to pay for something that otherwise I don't have the money for right now, or it's not on the right line. Replenishing classroom libraries right now is something I can spend out of my SDI money so that in the new budget, I'm not going to have staff asking me to replenish classroom libraries or embolden them in different ways. We're actually renovating our actual library, so I need to put a lot of money into that. So things like that. So those are some of the strategies that I use.
Awesome. Awesome. So we're going to hop through a few slides here and then we're going to ask Chris to share again, friends. And so next slide, Rob. And so one of the things again is we've touched upon for those of you that are just joining us, like what's allowable, what's not allowable. Chris, can you just clarify that we can book stuff for week 0 now, correct? Because it will happen prior to August 30th.
Yep. Yep. Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Short answer, yes.
Awesome, because we're getting that question quite a bit. And we always encourage folks, yes, let's get week 0 on the books now. So that way we can get organized, we can get a good game plan in place. So if you haven't booked week 0, we would strongly recommend doing that now. Chris, as far as what is allowable after May 9th,
Mhm.
what's the difference between putting something in a requisition May 9th and then changing it after May 9th and not doing it at all?
Yeah, so we know it's, Oracle can be really tricky, especially for the SDI grant, right? Um, what we've been told is that the May 9th deadline is for requisition creation, right? Submission. So you're submitting any requisitions by then. You can still modify them with some flexibility after May 9th, but I'm the reason I'm not relying on that at all, and I know Carla, we've talked about this some, like as a worst case scenario, yes, if you enter something on May 9th, there's, let's say, I don't know, a 50 to 75% chance it'll go through. You have it in there, you might need to modify it. We put one in the other day and for bilingual advisory committee funds, and then we got a question in Oracle, but that's a tricky little system to like notice the questions, respond to the questions, and resolve it. And you can't resubmit in certain ways, okay? And I'm not the expert on the little technical steps. The reason I'm trying to avoid that altogether is imagine if you try to submit something on a professional services SDI line, but then Kwame comes back to you understandably and says, hey, this is not professional services, it's seminars budget line based on these stipulations. You can't change it. It's too late. You'd have to resubmit it with a new budget line. The modifications are for things like you need to attach some type of justification. So you can go in and modify the requisition by attaching something. So if anyone else on the call thinks I'm wrong, please chime in because I don't want to be giving bad advice. I'm going based on what I was taught, which is why we're trying to make sure everything is submitted by, let's say, this Friday, May 2nd, so we can modify, and go back out and resubmit if needed before May 9th and make sure, you know how it is when you're submitting a requisition, sometimes they're instantly approved within an hour. But with this SDI grant, I've noticed it takes days because it's layers of approval because it's state and sometimes this is state funding. So I don't want to rely on it's May 9th. Now it's May 10th, 11th, 12th. Something's still not approved and now we're crossing our fingers. That's where the stress is that we can avoid.
So appreciate that, Chris. And I know you and I are both big fans of Kwame and Crystal and the team. They work so hard. Like, I think there's hundreds of schools, I think over 200 schools in Chicago Public Schools that have this grant. And they're, I think, a team of 3. And remember, friends, that this grant is audited every year. It's just one of those grants that's audited all the time. And so Kwame and Crystal are working tirelessly for all of us. And so thinking about, to Chris's point, how can we get it in now as soon as possible? We also are having an event. I know many of you, Tally, a lot of folks on the webinar are going to be there. We are making designated time at the Goldberry Woods Retreat for talking about budgets. Now, to Chris's point, this is after May 9th. So the Goldberry Woods Admin Academy is May 12th to the 16th. Next slide, please, Rob. If you haven't signed up, please sign up. There is a wait list, but we are getting an anonymous donor. And so we are going to be able to open up that wait list even a little bit more. You not only get an admin academy credit, but you're going to have a moment to talk as 4 hours built into the day that are optional to talk about budgets with colleagues. Now, friends, even though this is after the May 9th deadline, to Chris's point, right, there is an opportunity potentially that funds will open back up in July. If they do, this is the moment where we sit around in community and we say, hey, Chris, how do I solve for this potential of having these funds open back up in July? Next slide, please. And so one thing to elevate here is to Chris's point, Mindful Practices is a select source vendor, strategic source vendor, an SSV, and in the ed tech space, an SSP. That's under a board report. Now, when you go to enter that in the board report in Oracle, you need to be, or sorry, when you go to enter that in Oracle, you need to be able to reference the board report where we became an SSV, and that board report number is listed here. 24-0425-PR5. And so if you're like, how do I spend more than $10,000 on Mindful Practices as the vendor? That's the number that you enter into Oracle. Again, making sure you elevate those psychological services. Next slide, please. And so this is an example of the reference to psychological services that Chris and I were mentioning earlier. You'll notice here, this is Class Catalyst. Now, Class Catalyst is a software package. Software packages are also exempt. They're similar to textbooks. And so, that list, that Illinois list of vendors, because Class Catalyst is a software that you can get up to a 3-year license for, it doesn't have to be on that list. And so we kind of lucked out, truthfully, as vendors, because we're software on this side and we're psychological services on the other side. What do you enter into Oracle? You enter into Oracle what's seen here on the screen, comprehensive psychological services software with training and built-in interventions. We'll show, after Chris shares, we'll show you again a couple more examples, and we can email you these as well, of what to enter into Oracle. Now, we can't promise that they will be approved, of course, but again, leaning into that psychological services distinction that helps with that approval process in Oracle.
Yeah, I'll also add to what you said, Carla, that, like we said, money is fungible, right? So let's say you score some victories by spending, like we said, every single penny you can with your current SDI funds and your other spend down funds. Um, and then you're stuck by the time we get to Goldberry Woods, because I'll be there too. I'm looking forward to it. And think, well, geez, because we're also thinking there's a good chance budget will hopefully come out maybe one of the days that we're there, right? So if that happens, then we think, well, what are the things we didn't get in our old budget? How do we make it work there? And I know that, I see others on this call. These are the people we all call each other when budget comes out and we look for strategy with each other, right? So I'm looking forward to that. And I appreciate that Carla's carving out some time for that. When we do a funds inquiry, right? A funds inquiry in Oracle, and we export our entire budget. The way I do it, I don't look at non-payroll only. I look at all my budget lines, right? And this got easier when we have less um, salary budget lines. I think last year I had like 650 discretionary budget lines, and then I whittle it down and it's like 100 some. Now I start with 200 some. And what I do, you can see, watch this. If I unfilter it, it's just the whole budget, and there's a lot of budget lines here. But I end up filtering most of those down. You notice a lot of stuff. Okay, there's funds available, blank and zero. A lot of my negative lines, I'm not necessarily paying attention to them. So if I filter all that stuff out and I only keep in the stuff that's zero and above, there's a couple ways to do it, but I can simply go through here and click. I'm actually going to cancel just because I can get back to this easily. I filter it down to just the budget lines I need to look at. I do this digitally because you can see at the bottom of my screen, I've got my entire budget going back the whole year here. And I like to do it this way because then I can go back a few weeks and go, didn't I have more money on this line? Oh, yeah, I did. And then if I want a deeper dive, I go into Oracle, but Oracle's clunky. The spreadsheet is simple. It's just this simple. Everything's right here. And so what I've done, the color coding here is I've color coded all I've sorted it by fund and grant, because we know budget 101, you can't cross funds and grants. Anything within 115 00006, that's this one right here, right, in orange. I know I can move that money. Sometimes there's some stipulations, but I can move it, right? 115575 is the easiest to move. You move it, it's right there for you, right? Some of these are a little trickier, but it's generally there, right? BAC money, I mentioned, we're getting a couple of pushback, so we got to figure out a way to get it done. but I color code it so I can see how much money do I have here. Oh, and then in the bottom right corner, when you highlight those cells, it tells you got 889 bucks. I wonder what I can get with that money for my preschool teachers. Here in my blue, interesting. I got about $39,000. I got all that money going out the door in the next couple days. And I can see all of it. And here's the main part that we're talking about with this little webinar today is my 433198. Remember the little side note, not 433189, right? That was last year's money. It's still in my budget, and I always have to remind myself, don't touch it, because if I try to, it's going to just bounce back and say, grant expired, blah, 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 right? But I've got across these lines, it looks like a lot, geez, $150,000 left and more that I already put in buckets. But that money, like we said, we might not have a grant modification form. So I got to spend this money. I got 33,000 for software licenses and another 47,000 for software licenses in a different line. I've got money for this, that, and the other, right? But I know I can't move it, unlike those other lines. But I know that it's there, and I know that if I do another funds inquiry after this money is out the door and the purchase order is created, then I'll see what I've got left, and hopefully it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and then I've got nothing left, right? Um, Beyond that, there are some lines. These are the lines I have. I'll point this out. When I look at, I had it up here. I don't know if I still have it up, but I had a spreadsheet of some of the grant. Let me see. I don't think I have it up anymore, but a spreadsheet that somebody had sent me of like what each budget line in SDIG is for. And I just stumbled onto it recently. I don't remember if I had ever seen it before, but it was in the Google Drive. And it told me there are some other things like if you're going to pay for a seminar fee subscription professional memberships, I don't have money on a travel budget line or anything like that. But in the grant modification form, you might have different budget lines when you do a funds inquiry. You might have different budget lines available to you than I have for me based on prior grant modification forms or grant modifications. The only other thing I'll add here is that, so this is my budget, right? This is when I do a funds inquiry. When you go into your, where is it, in PC positions in Oracle, you can do a BEM inquiry as well. And here's what I do with the BEM inquiry. It's really ugly on the color coding. These are buckets that I can't use anymore. But when I do a BEM inquiry, I export everything. And then because I've done that again, down at the bottom, you can see my BEM on February 4th. I can see, 622775. I already did the research back then. That one is overused. I can't use it anymore. So when I do a new BEM inquiry and I look at all my buckets again, I remind myself, oh yeah, 622775 is overused. I can't use it anymore. So I highlight it in red. So all these ones that are in red, I can kind of just at some point just like hide them like this. They're gone. This one, tutor core. It's there, but I can't touch it, right? They get paid elsewhere. This is what I have left. 3 that my clerk is confirming what they're for, but they really don't have that much money on them. It's a total of 380 bucks. But ooh, look at this one right here. This miscellaneous bucket, it's got $18,000 on it from Ms. Haidar, one of my miscellaneous employees. There's no way she's going to spend that by the end of the year. What if I reduce that bucket and put it onto a budget line, onto a pointer line, and then I create a purchase order for this, that, or the other? Like we said, money is fungible. So if there's something I can't get with my SDI money, there we go. There's some magical money that I'm not going to give back to the board. I'm going to spend every penny of that. So why don't I pause there, Carla? And like I said, I'm happy to share this out with others. I've created some other things in the past, but just a simple export, put it in a spreadsheet, sort it, color code it, helps me track and keep an eye on my money.
So appreciate this, Chris. And would love to turn it over to Principal Tally, who's with us, who runs a high school. Principal Tally, what are things that we should be thinking about from the high school lens? Like where are there similarities, where are there differences?
I'm glad you asked. Hey guys, so
Hey.
for me, I'm looking at, like Chris said, what it is I have left to do. I'm actually working with my clerk today to say, hey, let's lay it all out. And Chris, I need you to, yeah, I want to do that. That's really fun for me being a numbers guy. But at the high school level, think about, you know, like he said, what are you going to need for the next year, the next couple of years? Going back to your budget, looking to see, what you did in terms of your CIWP priorities. Where did you spend most of your money? You're probably going to either do that again or you're not, depending on whether it's something that's annual or something that you did that one time and it's going to sustain you throughout the next couple of years. One thing that I'm looking at now, Chris, maybe you can help me with this. I'm kind of getting a little PD tutoring right now. How do we find out which buckets extend through the end of the year and summer in terms of which buckets to create for summer book?
It's a good question. So are we talking in like all of BEM, SDI, and just general
Everything.
budget? In Oracle, I know there's a way, and like I said, like I know my clerk is digging around in there quicker than me, so we could always connect our clerks too. But I know that, and she's always happy to do that because she's always on those like Google Meets with like what's her name, Maria Brown and others about like learning the best tips and tricks. But I know that you can in the BEM, in the PC positions, if you look at bucket positions, you can see when buckets expire just in general, like because I've got some that expired a couple months ago. So that's one way. And specifically with SDI, what Kwame told me, and you can always G-chat Kwame and he can respond too, but that what I put in the document, he said is that any buckets that are closing on June 30th. So remember in the budget modification form, there was an interesting thing in there for SDI, right? It said, are you modifying, this is what I did in March. Are you modifying an existing bucket that will close on June 30th? Or are you opening a new bucket that'll go through August 31st? Those were a couple options. I probably should have said I want to open a new bucket, but we already had a good bucket, so I just wanted to put more money in it. Now I'm like, shoot, it's going to close on June 30th. But my clerk smartly asked him, well, what is going to happen? There's still money in there, and why the grant isn't expiring. And he said that's called a courtesy bucket. If there's still money in it by about mid-July, that bucket reopens with money in it. And yes, it backdates to July 1st. So what I'm planning on is once summer school starts, um, I'm going to be running summer programming right after July 1st. And he also cautioned, I put in the document, people won't get paid till August because of all that, right? If the bucket doesn't open till mid-July, the delay in payroll, they won't get paid till later. But I'm just going to tell my people, like, you got to trust me. Money's coming, okay? And they'll trust me, or they'll trust you, right? So does that kind of answer it? I think that's the gist of it. And if all else fails, I always call somebody or my clerk does and says walk me through it. Like to this day, I don't open buckets on my own because I'm worried I'm going to click like the wrong step or lane or something like that. I think, probably like you, like I probably get it right. You'd probably get it right, but what if? So I let them help with that.
No, that was pretty thorough. I appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, and we always say we wear so many hats, right? This is like we can't be getting everything. We're expected to get it all right, but we can't know it all up here ourselves, right? So, I always appreciate you and your thoughtfulness on this stuff too.
Just what I was thinking. Is like you two are thought leaders in the district, and so I think you're giving by you modeling giving yourselves grace with budgets because you're busy just like getting it done principals. I think other principals will hop on the webinar, watch the recording, and say, "Oh, it's okay." Right? Like if Tally's experiencing this, then it's okay that I am too, right? And so, when we think about between now and May 9th, which is next Friday. Right? What's the stuff that would get in the way of us completing it? Time. I mean, you're running a big successful high school, right? Like so what are the obstacles to getting this done prior to May 9th?
Just carving out that protected time with you and your trusted team, your clerk, and protecting that, scheduling it. We have two major events next week. We have a renaming ceremony for the Harlem Globetrotters, which actually started in Phillips. And then my girls who won fourth in the state for basketball. There's a Network 17 parade at Chicago. So with all those, I got to make sure that I'm showing face at those two places, making sure that you carve out time and kind of have a plan in place and a plan ABC. That's always contentious, and who's to say budgets might come out next week, so but I'm hoping that with the time that I've already kind of protected for myself and my team, that we can kind of sequester, go away, figure it all out, and everybody come out smiling, happy. I don't know. We'll see.
I can add to that too that, like I mentioned earlier, payroll is also due next week. So I know my clerk is stressed out. Like that's why she was hoping that we could finalize everything this week. And I said, I'd love for us to finalize everything this week. And if the money's not spent, we still got to spend it, right? So like it's done when it's done. It's going to be done no matter what on May 9th, but hopefully before that. But it's contingent on lining up all these POs and putting them out the door. And to Rashad's point, like it would be nice if we had next year's budget now. So then we can kind of look backwards and forward at the same time and go, oh, I could buy this one out of next year. I could buy this one out of last year. But we can't. Usually we get that opportunity, right? There's that overlap. So the only upside of the not overlap is my brain only needs to live in one space right now, but I'm naturally thinking about next year already. So it kind of would be nice. But at least I'm not trying to juggle both right now in real time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the things is that we were thinking about as an organization, like how can we support you? And so for principals that are listening, let us know what you need. Like, let's go have food at Mi Tierra and we'll just we'll be like, okay, we're here at Mi Tierra eating tacos for 2 hours and we're working on budgets together. Like, what's the thing? Notice here I shared on the slide, this is an example of the professional services for how they're listed for this. So you're elevating the psychological services component. So things that mindful practice already does, but just making sure that we name them. We call it social emotional learning, collective well-being, right? And here the state just wants us to call it psychological services. It's like, okay. And so we're like, and if we look up psychological services, friends, it's exactly the work that we already do together. And so it's just using different language because ISB wants to hear psychological services versus well-being or SEL. And so thinking about Chris, and this is another example of seminars and workshops. Like, Chris, would a conference, like we have a conference day on June 24th at South Shore Cultural Center. Would that sending adults in your buildings to that conference, would that count for the seminar, workshop, and conference line?
It sounds like it.
Yeah,
The specific wording I've been told by Crystal is if it's a conference that is open to others, then yes. It's not like, oh, we're getting professional development for our staff. No one else is invited, but we're calling it a conference. That's what I've
right.
been told by her would be denied. So that sounds like it. But once again, my only caveat is I'm not the one actually approving it. But yeah, sounds good.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And thank you for elevating that, Chris, that it's really important that you know that the June 24th day at Chicago at South Shore Cultural Center is all schools coming together, or all schools invited to come together. So it would just be for your school. One more quick thing I want to make sure that I share quickly is the Class Catalyst and how Class Catalyst, again, how you talk about Class Catalyst. And so again, how it works, many of us are familiar on the call. It's a software, it's a student mental health and social emotional learning platform. Again, a psychological services platform. And it's for high school as well as for elementary schools. It includes watchwords and keywords alert, again, that tie back to the psychological services component. We've got alerts that are triggered that are sent to administrators as well as counselors and social workers, as well as in the fall, it's going to include the universal mental health screener. We know that the Senate bill just passed that mandates that in 2027. So those schools that would have Class Catalyst in the fall are ahead of the curve because that mental health screener is included. Again, looking here, you can have just the flat rate package, and you can also have a package which includes advanced analytics with Kyojun Kim, our research partner, which includes that mental health screener. And you can buy it as a 3-year package, which is really nice. Again, it includes here what to enter into Oracle. And so, Chris, as you're looking at all this, are there questions that pop up just from the lens of a principal?
Um, I one thing I appreciate about what you're doing, Carla, and I know of a few other vendors that do this in different ways, is you're thinking about what just in a very ethically good way of what your organization is offering that is beneficial to schools. Like when I think of mindful practices, and I've been, working with you for a couple of years now in different capacities, there's staff professional development, there's Class Catalyst, there's just a lot of the coaching and work that comes around Class Catalyst. So there's the staff professional development, all just the peer, like you say, Carla, like what's the staff's tolerance for cheese, right? Just doing the cheese,
Right, right.
hula hoops, feather boas. Like, we all need to do some of that. But then there's
Right.
also just the more like more, I don't want to say more authentic, but more like emotionally heavy part of
Mhm.
just the self-care and the importance of that. And I think that we all learned the importance of that in the pandemic. And then also the directly touching students part of it. I was auditing recently the class catalyst usage in my building to make sure that if we're going to make a big decision on something like this, are we using it with our fidelity to make a well-informed decision? And so that makes me think, well, where am I putting my money and how is it benefiting our CIWP and our school? So it's not just like this is the one thing that you guys offer. I appreciate that you're giving us a few things to consider in the various priorities of our school, especially now on what, May 6th. Hey, interesting. On the same day that we're going to be seeing you for that Cubs game is the same day that the My Voice My School results come out. So you know that's going to be heavy on our mind. We're thinking pink and yellow and green, and then we're going to be saying, Carla, I got some culture work I got to do in my building, right? So
Right, 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 right. And thank you for that, Chris. And I love that you're looking at I love that you're looking at the data. Like the fact that you're using the student level data and you're crosswalking with your 5Es. Oh my gosh. Like that. If Kiljun were here, he would be he'd be hugging you. He'd be so excited. Another piece, friends, I want to make sure I include is our grant calculator. Again, major kudos to Crystal Dorsey and the team for helping us think of like what's a way for principals to be able to calculate. So to Chris's point, looking at those budget lines and saying, this is what's there. And then, hey, I can say like, oh, I've got $35,000. Let's see, let me go to that grant calculator. You'll notice here that the grant calculator talks about the software as well as the psychological services. Again, I can email all that to you if you just want to cut and paste that language. The grant calculator will go step by step and it will give you a table to download to hopefully make it easier. You know, we realize to Chris's point that Oracle can be a little bit wonky sometimes. I also want to include here that we have office hours. Many of you have been working with my colleague, DeAndre Short, and DeAndre would be with us here today. He's been working in with our friends and partners in East St. Louis, but DeAndre and I both have office hours. Please feel free to ping us if it's like, hey, it would be really helpful, Car, if you just, came to my school. We walk through again, like the psychological services component, the language for Oracle. We're a phone call away. We really want to be a partner in this. And Kwame and Crystal as well have voiced that they're there if you want them to come to your school and lend a hand. They've been so helpful with this. I think everyone just wants to support principals because we all know like this can be a heavy lift. And so, Chris, for your colleagues here who are watching the recording or on the call, what are your words of advice here as we close? What are things to think about? Because you're right, paralysis can set in. It can be really intimidating to spend all this money in such a short window. What should we be thinking about?
yeah, my main thing I'm thinking right now is taking care of my clerk because I know that she's doing the heavy lifting here. Like I don't like I feel like I'm pretty good with budget. I've done like the CSBO trainings and all that for that endorsement, and still, my clerk was out on leave last year, and I had to manage so much of that myself with a sub clerk who was trying to get by. Um, so I was doing the marketplace purchases. I was helping with purchase orders and things like that. But man, I was driving myself crazy with it, just trying to get that done on top of everything else on our plate. So I'm making sure that there's money in a bucket to pay her for overtime. I was saying send shopping carts. Some principals use the marketplace shopping carts, some don't. We do. I was saying, send your carts to Catalina, our clerk. And then I said, nope, send them to me instead. I will manage that. We have enough discretion to like, for me to say, I'm just maybe going to pop into a little less classrooms for the next week or so. So I have a little more time to work on budget. I can delegate a little bit of this and that so that I have more time for this. And if I take on a little more, I can take it off my clerk's plate because I know there's going to be some stuff. She's got to line up those POs and get them out the door. But if I can go back and forth with a vendor and try and get some of those questions answered, someone just asked me for tuning forks for a science unit. I can handle that in 10 minutes or less in the marketplace through Amazon or whatever vendor so that Catalina doesn't have to think there's one more thing I got to get done. Nope, no, there's not. Don't even talk to Catalina about it. Let it go through me. I'm trying to reduce her stress. And I'm just going to keep reading her every day from now until May 9th. Buy her lunch once. Just make sure she can go hide in a back office somewhere and just not, buckle down and get it all done because I want to make sure that she doesn't drive herself crazy in the process.
Chris, that is
That's
so
fun.
you. You are always thinking of others, friend. You really are. You really are. And so I think the message, friends, spoil your clerk, give him a hug, pick up Starbucks on the way to school or Dunkin'. And so Chris, if folks are listening to the webinar and they're here and they're watching the recording and they're saying, okay, I have questions. What's the best next step for them? I'm guessing to use your one-page guide. They can also email me or DeAndre, Vienna Web. Emails are listed here on the screen. I'll make sure I include mine as well. Any other closing thing, friends, Chris, for people that might be listening and saying, I didn't spend the money last year. I felt bad, but I don't know if I'm gonna get a chance to spend it this year. How do we help support folks?
Try to backwards map from May 9th, right? And not even, I mean, technically it's May 9th, right? But like try to backwards map from a couple days before that. That's one thing I did, and I've talked to a couple of principals that I've like mentored or worked with, or when I say mentor, like I might be advising them on this, but they're advising me on that. So we're always like, if I scratch their back with this, then they'll help me with that. And one thing I did was the moment we heard May 9th was the spending deadline, I sat down with my clerk and my AP and my resident principal, and we mapped out, well, if we're going to get everything spent by then, what's the deadline for this? What's the deadline for this? We got to try to send everything out the door with an arbitrary deadline before that, which means we need to get all the POs or the quotes in by this date. That means we got to convene our teacher leadership teams by this date. Now all that is very condensed if you haven't done some of those steps, but try to get those done. And I'd say, we all need a little motivator, right? And I think the big motivator for me right now is, my community doesn't know how much money we left on the table last year. I'd just be embarrassed to tell them, just being honest. And I feel like some of it was out of my control, but ultimately, no one's ever going to look at those people. They're going to look at us. So one thing I'm going to say it as a positive. I want to celebrate after May 9th how much money I spent for the good of kids and for the good of my staff. And I want to brag to my LSC how we didn't leave a penny on the table. Now, if that's the motivator that I'm going to staple up to my wall, that's the motivation in there. The cat dangling from the tree that says just hang in there, right? So I'm motivating myself to get it done so that afterwards I can present to my LSC and say, check out all the awesome things we got with this spend down money. So, but in the meantime, it is stressful. And hey, we know what we signed up for. This is not an easy job. Nobody wants it. So let's get it done and then let's pat ourselves on the back when it's done.
Thank you so much, Chris. This has been so amazingly helpful. Dr. Graves, everybody. Folks are clapping, they're cheering, they're hooting, hollering. We just so appreciate you, friend, and thank you so much to Principal Tally and others for questions and items in the chat. Again, we will be sending this out as a recording. Feel free to email me, DeAndre Vienna, with any questions, as well as Kwame and Crystal. We're all here to support you and are so grateful to all of you for sharing your very precious and valuable time with us today. Chris, thank you again. Every time I'm with you, I feel like I learned so much. I'm really grateful for your time.
Well, thanks so much. I appreciate all you've done for our school and our students. And, it's always good learning for us as well. So.
Thank you. Appreciate you.